there comes a quiet moment in your life. Not loud, not dramatic, deeply transformative. A moment where you realize you are no longer the same person who once tolerated pain in silence. Healing quietly reshapes what you are willing to accept. At first, you may not even notice it happening. The same situations appear, the same people speak, the same patterns try to repeat themselves, but something inside you feels different. What you once ignored now catches your attention. What you once excused now creates discomfort. It is not because the world has changed, but because you have. There was a time when you tolerated certain behaviors because they felt familiar. You told yourself that this is just how people are, that maybe you were expecting too much, that maybe love requires sacrifice in ways that slowly diminish you. You learned to stay silent, to keep the peace. You learned to accept less so you would not lose connection. And without realizing it, you trained yourself to normalize what was hurting you. But healing begins to interrupt that pattern. It brings awareness into places where there was once numbness. You start to recognize the subtle ways your energy is drained, the conversations that leave you feeling small, the moments where your voice is dismissed, the times when your kindness is taken for granted. These are things you may have once overlooked, but now they sit differently within you. They linger. They ask to be acknowledged. With healing, your internal standards rise, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You begin to understand that respect is not something you should have to earn through exhaustion. Care is not something that should feel inconsistent. And love is not supposed to come with a constant sense of unease. You stop making excuses for others at the cost of your own well-being. You stop over-explaining your feelings just to be understood by those who refuse to listen. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your growth. And this shift can feel uncomfortable because for a long time, your identity may have been tied to being patient, understanding, and accommodating. You may have believed that enduring pain quietly was a sign of strength. So when you begin to step away from that version of yourself, it can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. You might question yourself. You might wonder if you are becoming too distant, too guarded, too different. But what is really happening is that you are no longer betraying yourself to maintain comfort in others. You begin to trust your feelings instead of dismissing them. When something feels wrong, you no longer silence that instinct. You sit with it, you listen, you allow it to guide you. And in doing so, you create space between yourself and what no longer aligns with your well-being. The tolerance you once had was never a sign of weakness. It was a reflection of what you had learned, what you had experienced, and what you believed you deserved at the time. But healing updates that belief. It replaces confusion with understanding. It replaces self-doubt with quiet certainty. And slowly, without force, you begin to choose differently. Awareness does not arrive all at once. It unfolds slowly, like light entering a room that was once dim. At first, everything looks the same, but the more the light spreads, the more you begin to notice what was always there. Healing sharpens this awareness. It brings you closer to your own inner voice, the one that had been buried beneath noise, doubt, and emotional exhaustion. There was a time when you moved through life reacting rather than observing. You accepted how things felt without questioning them deeply. If something disturbed your peace, you pushed it aside. If someone's presence made you uneasy, You ignored the feeling and told yourself you were overthinking. You became skilled at silencing your intuition, convincing yourself that discomfort was something to endure rather than understand. But healing changes the way you experience everything. You begin to notice how your body responds to different people and environments. Some conversations leave you feeling calm, understood, and grounded. Others leave a subtle heaviness, a tension you cannot quite explain, but can no longer ignore. This is awareness speaking through you, not in words, but in feeling. Peace becomes something you can clearly recognize. It is no longer an abstract idea, but a real, lived experience. It feels like clarity in your thoughts, steadiness in your emotions, and ease in your presence. When you are at peace, there is no need to prove yourself, no pressure to perform, no fear of being misunderstood. You simply exist without resistance. At the same time, disturbance becomes just as clear. It reveals itself in small ways at first. A shift in your mood after certain interactions, a sense of restlessness when you are around specific people, a quiet inner voice that says something is not right. These signs may have always been there, but now you are no longer disconnected from them. You feel them fully and you begin to trust what they are telling you. This awareness does not make you more sensitive in a fragile way. It makes you more aligned. You are no longer easily pulled into chaos because you can see it for what it is. You recognize when energy is draining rather than nourishing. You understand when silence is peaceful versus when it is heavy and uncomfortable. As your awareness deepens, you also begin to notice your own patterns, the ways you once responded to discomfort, the habits of overgiving, over-explaining, or overstaying. You see these patterns without judgment, but with clarity. And in seeing them, you create the possibility to respond differently. You become more intentional with your presence. You choose where to invest your time, your energy, and your attention. You no longer give these things away automatically. Instead, you pause, you observe, you feel, and in that pause, you protect your peace. This heightened awareness becomes a quiet guide. It does not force you to act, but it shows you the truth of each moment. It allows you to step back from situations that once consumed you. It gives you the space to choose calm over chaos, clarity over confusion, and alignment over attachment. What once felt normal now feels different, not because it has changed, but because you can finally see it clearly. Setting boundaries often begins as an unfamiliar and uncomfortable act. For a long time, you may have believed that saying yes was the safest way to keep connection, that being available at all times made you valuable, that putting others before yourself was a sign of kindness. You learned to stretch your limits, to give more than you had, and to remain present even when your energy was already depleted. In those moments, it did not feel like you had a choice. You thought that if you said no, you might disappoint someone. If you spoke up, you might create conflict. If you stepped back, you might be misunderstood. So you stayed within patterns that slowly drained you, convincing yourself that this was what it meant to care. But as healing begins to take root within you, something shifts. You start to recognize that constantly abandoning your own needs is not love. It is not generosity. It is a quiet form of self-neglect. And the more aware you become, the harder it is to ignore the cost of living without boundaries. You feel the exhaustion more clearly. You notice the resentment building beneath your silence. You begin to understand that every time you say yes when you mean no. You move further away from your own sense of peace. Boundaries emerge from this awareness, not as walls to shut people out, but as a form of respect for yourself. They are not about controlling others or demanding perfection. They are about defining what you are willing to accept and what you are no longer able to carry. At first, setting a boundary can feel heavy. Your voice may shake. Your words may feel uncertain. You may second guess yourself after speaking. This is natural because you are stepping into a way of being that is new to you. You are learning to honor your limits in a world where you once ignored them. You begin with small moments, choosing not to engage in conversations that drain you, allowing yourself to step away when you feel overwhelmed, saying no without over-explaining or apologizing for protecting your time. These actions may seem simple, but they carry a deep transformation within them. With each boundary you set, you rebuild trust with yourself. You show yourself that your feelings matter, that your energy is valuable, that your presence is not something to be given away without care. And over time, this quiet self-respect becomes stronger than the fear of being misunderstood. Not everyone will respond well to your boundaries. Some may question them. Some may resist them. Some may even try to make you feel guilty for changing. But their reaction is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a reflection of what they were once able to access without limits. You are no longer living in that space. You begin to understand that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Without boundaries, your energy becomes scattered, your mind becomes restless, and your sense of self becomes unclear. But with boundaries, there is structure, there is clarity, there is a quiet strength that allows you to remain grounded. Even when the world around you feels uncertain, you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You no longer seek approval for the decisions that protect your well-being. Instead, you move with a calm certainty, knowing that honoring your limits is an essential part of honoring who you are. Growth has a quiet way of changing your world, not by adding more people to your life, but by gently revealing who no longer belongs in it. As you begin to heal and evolve, your perspective shifts, your values deepen, and your tolerance for what once felt acceptable begins to fade. And in this transformation, a certain kind of loneliness can appear. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is something more subtle. It is the feeling of standing in a space where you no longer fully connect with the people, conversations, and environments that once felt familiar. You may find yourself in the same rooms, hearing the same voices, but something within you feels distant, as if you are no longer part of that frequency. This can be confusing at first. You may question why things that once made you feel comfortable now leave you feeling empty. You may wonder why your desire to engage has decreased, why your energy feels more reserved, why you no longer have the same enthusiasm for certain connections. It can feel like you are losing something important, something that once gave you a sense of belonging. But what you are experiencing is not loss in the way it seems. It is a shift in alignment. As you grow, your inner world becomes more refined. You begin to seek depth instead of surface, honesty instead of convenience, peace instead of constant stimulation. And not everyone around you is on that same path. Some are still comfortable in patterns that you have outgrown. Some are not yet ready to look within, to question, to change. And because of this, the connection that once existed begins to loosen. You may try to hold on at first. You may attempt to reconnect in the same ways you always have, to fit back into conversations that no longer resonate, to maintain bonds that now feel strained. But the more you try, the more you feel the disconnect. It is not because there is something wrong with you or them. It is simply that you are no longer moving in the same direction. This realization can bring a quiet sadness. There may be moments where you miss the ease of how things used to be, the simplicity of not questioning the comfort of familiar routines. You may feel the absence of certain people more deeply, even if you know that staying connected in the same way is no longer healthy for you. It is easy to feel alone. But this solitude carries a different kind of purpose. It creates space for you to understand yourself more clearly, to strengthen your connection with your own thoughts and emotions without distraction. It allows you to become comfortable in your own presence, not as a temporary state, but as a foundation. You begin to realize that being alone is not the same as being disconnected. There is a quiet strength in standing by yourself, in not forcing connections that no longer feel true, in allowing relationships to evolve or fade without resistance. You start to value authenticity over familiarity, even if it means walking a path that fewer people understand. And slowly, your relationship with loneliness changes. It becomes less of something to fear and more of something to respect. It teaches you patience. It teaches you clarity. It teaches you that not everyone is meant to walk with you through every stage of your life, and that this is a natural part of growth. You no longer chase connection out of fear of being alone. You begin to wait for connections that align with who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. And in that waiting, there is a quiet transformation taking place within you. There was a time when pain felt familiar, not because you wanted it, but because you had learned to live with it. You stayed in situations that did not feel right, held on to connections that drained you, and accepted behaviors that slowly chipped away at your sense of self. It was not a conscious choice. It was a pattern shaped by habit, by fear, and by the quiet belief that this was simply how things were meant to be. Familiar pain has a way of disguising itself as comfort. Even when it hurts, it feels known, predictable. You understand how to navigate it, how to respond, how to endure it. And because of that, leaving it behind can feel more frightening than staying. The unknown asks more of you than the familiar ever did. It asks you to trust yourself without certainty, to walk forward without guarantees, to release what you have known for something you cannot yet fully see. But healing begins to change your relationship with this pattern. You start to notice the cost of staying where you are not at peace. The emotional weight becomes harder to carry. The constant tension, the quiet disappointment, the inner conflict, it all becomes more visible. What you once tolerated without question now feels heavier, more difficult to justify. At the same time, you begin to experience moments of genuine peace. They may be small at first, a sense of calm when you are alone, a feeling of clarity after stepping away from something that once overwhelmed you, a quiet relief in choosing not to engage in what drains you. These moments may seem simple, but they introduce you to a different way of being, one that is not rooted in struggle, but in ease. And once you feel that kind of peace, even briefly, something shifts within you. You begin to realize that peace is not something distant or unattainable. It is something you can choose. it becomes a reference point, a new standard against which everything else is measured. When you return to situations that once felt normal, you notice the contrast more clearly. The noise feels louder. The tension feels sharper. The discomfort feels more present. This awareness makes it harder to go back, not because you are forcing yourself to change, but because you can no longer ignore what you feel. The familiar pain loses its hold over you. It no longer feels like comfort. It feels like something you have outgrown. Choosing peace, however, is not always easy. There may still be moments where you are tempted to return to what is known, to reconnect with what once felt secure, even if it was not healthy. The mind often seeks familiarity, even at the expense of well-being. But now there is a deeper awareness within you that pauses before you repeat the same pattern. In that pause, you begin to choose differently. You choose not to engage in conversations that disturb your calm. You choose to remain in spaces where your presence feels unappreciated. You choose not to give your energy to dynamics that leave you feeling depleted. These choices may seem small, but they represent a profound shift in how you value yourself. You begin to understand that peace is not something you find by chance. It is something you protect through your decisions. With each choice, you move further away from what once hurt you and closer to a life that feels aligned, steady, and true to who you are becoming. And so, healing is not just about letting go of pain. It is about becoming someone who no longer negotiates with it. You begin to walk differently, not in a way that seeks attention, but in a way that reflects quiet certainty. You no longer question your worth in the presence of those who fail to see it. You no longer stay where your spirit feels heavy. You no longer confuse familiarity with belonging. There is a deep calm that replaces the chaos you once tolerated, a stillness within you that does not need validation, explanation, or permission. You understand now that your peace is your responsibility and protecting it is not something you apologize for. You stop trying to return to who you used to be because you see clearly now. There was nothing there for you except lessons you needed to learn. And as you move forward, you carry those lessons not as burdens, but as wisdom. You become more aware, more intentional, more aligned. Not perfect, not untouched by difficulty, but grounded in a truth that cannot be easily shaken. That you deserve peace, that you deserve respect, that you deserve a life where your presence is valued, not tolerated. And once you truly understand this, not just in your mind, but within your being, there is no going back. Only forward, with clarity, with strength, and with a quiet, unshakable sense of self.